Marble sings, you know, not in melodies, but in memory. Everything you say, everything you do, it lingers. It bounces from the cold walls, climbs into the coffered ceilings, and settles, ever so softly, in the corners of eternity. But not all songs are meant to be heard, especially not at night. Curious now, aren't you? Before we begin, before we truly descend into the lantern-lit villas and silken sheets of ancient Rome, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I like to imagine you there, wherever you are, on a couch, in a quiet room, with a flickering screen and heavy lids. Some of you it's 2:43 a.m, in others it's a crisp dawn. I read them all. You're not just listening, you're part of this wandering through time. Now, settle in, make yourself comfortable, pull the covers over your legs, or wrap the blanket a little tighter. Let your phone cradle itself beside you. Loosen your jaw, rest your arms. Let the sounds drift and the story begin. Because tonight you're not quite here anymore. Tonight you are in ancient Rome, and you've just stepped into a world of candlelight, whispered secrets, and walls that do not forgive a single sound. You're standing in the atrium of a domus, one of the larger private homes in the heart of Rome, somewhere near the Palatine Hill. It's early evening, and the city outside is dimming into gold. There's the echo of wheels on paving stones, the occasional call of a vendor still packing up olives, and the warm flicker of terracotta lanterns casting soft shadows on the street. Inside, it's cooler. The air smells of beeswax and myrrh. Your sandals whisper across the mosaic floor, scenes of heroes and gods immortalized in tiny pieces of painted stone. Your fingers brush against a marble column, cool to the touch, even in August. Here you can almost hear the heartbeat of the city. Not the clamour, but the hush. The breath between dinner and darkness, between wakefulness and dreams. You're a guest here. Or perhaps you live here. Perhaps this domus belongs to you and your partner. A thoughtful marriage, politically sound, perhaps even affectionate. The two of you share not only a home, but secrets and silences. But the walls, the walls, they share everything. They are marble, painted and polished with veins like rivers of pink and pearl, stunning to look at, cold to the touch, and utterly, mercilessly echoing. Privacy, in a Roman household, was a delicate illusion. Sound carries in strange ways here. Conversations in the triclinium, the dining room, can often be overheard from the bath chamber. A whisper in the courtyard finds its way, somehow, to the bedroom. Footsteps from the slaves echo just as loud as a soft laugh behind a curtain. Bedrooms, or cubicular, are not built for acoustics. They are small, often without doors, and nestled tightly between other rooms and narrow walls. Curtains may separate them from the corridor, but fabric does not muffle passion, or, worse, embarrassment. And so, the married couples of Rome, senators, poets, merchants, and their companions, faced a rather personal architectural challenge. How do you make love in a house that listens? More pressingly, how do you spare yourself from the indignity of awkward noises bouncing from marble wall to marble wall, like a poorly shot arrow off a shield? This, dear listener, is where our journey begins. Not with scandal, not with conquest, but with intimacy. Quiet, human, and, sometimes, hopelessly awkward. Let us drift backward, through the portico, past the garden, to a night not so different from this one. There's a flickering oil lamp, a low-burning brazier, and the sound of a woman humming a soft tune from the kitchen. You are in your cubiculum, reclining on a raised bed adorned with Tyrian-dyed linens. Your partner is beside you, reading from a scroll, Catullus perhaps, or Ovid. The bedroom is dim, and the only movement is the gentle flutter of a curtain caught in the summer breeze. You feel the closeness of the moment. You reach out, and then the wooden frame creaks. Your elbow knocks a polished bronze lamp, and then, worse, a bodily noise, not dramatic, but amplified tenfold by the cruel acoustics of stone and plaster. There is a silence, not just between the two of you, but from the entire house. You hear it. You know someone else did too. You exhale. And this is where our story blossoms. Because in that moment, you understand what thousands of Romans before you understood. That architecture may be noble, but the human body is always unpredictable. So they found ways, whispers, rituals, habits and tools, some humorous, some clever, and some downright musical. Because in ancient Rome, you didn't just try to be quiet. Sometimes, you covered the noise. In the next part of our journey, we'll step into the gardens of the elite, where lutes and flutes mingle with laughter, not for art, but for modesty. We'll look at the banquets, the perfumed pillows, and the surprisingly intimate use of household slaves as privacy buffers. We'll explore how noise became a cultural signifier, how moans were sometimes fashionable and sometimes humiliating. We'll drift through whispered conversations, through temple walls, into the very heart of Roman intimacy, tender, embarrassed, and timeless. But for now, rest. Listen to the city as it fades behind you. The soft tread of a servant extinguishing the last lamp. The slow, satisfied sigh of a marble house, returning to stillness. The curtain sways again, and the night folds gently into itself. You sit up slowly, the weight of your tunic falling across your legs, and listen. Somewhere down the corridor you hear it, a faint plucking of strings, uneven, private, not performance but presence. Music in a Roman household is many things: entertainment, art, ritual. But sometimes it serves a more humble, more human purpose: distraction. You step quietly into the peristyle, that open-air courtyard at the centre of so many Roman homes. The sky above is darkening into deep violet, stars appearing one by one, indifferent and cold. Cypress trees sway gently, their shadows long and flickering against the whitewashed walls. A slave kneels by the edge of the impluvium, the central pool that catches rainwater, and dips a clay jug into its surface. They glance at you, nod once, and return to their task. You hear the music again, closer now, a slow tune on the double pipe orlos, reedy and wavering. A woman plays it, seated on a low bench beside the fig tree, her eyes closed, fingers dancing over the wood. You recognize her. Not a performer, not tonight. She belongs to the house, perhaps your cousin, or your partner's sister, or a close friend taken in after a husband's death. She plays to herself, but also not only to herself. The sound rises, soft but insistent, and beneath it you begin to notice how many other sounds it folds into. Sandals brushing stone, the muted clink of ceramic against silver, even the quiet laugh of a child behind one of the inner curtains. In a house like this, sound is layered deliberately. This is no accident. You walk the path of small white stones toward the west colonnade, letting your fingers skim the ivy-draped column. There, reclining beside the brazier with a scroll half unrolled in one hand, is your spouse. They look up, smile faintly, and gesture for you to sit. You do, lowering yourself onto the curved wooden bench and accepting the cup they offer. It smells of watered wine and rose. The music continues. The flute's thin voice twines itself through the garden's many leaves, between marble and mosaic, into the very bone of the house, and you realize it is a shield. Not for war, but for modesty. The woman plays each night. Not always in the same place, not always the same song, but she plays, often when the house is otherwise quiet, and she plays long after anyone asks her to. And it's understood, without needing to be said aloud, that the music is for more than ambiance. You shift closer to your partner, their leg brushes yours, and as you whisper something, an inside joke perhaps, or a suggestion wrapped in ritual, they lean in, but they do not laugh aloud. The music gives you cover, not from scorn, but from intrusion. Not all noises can be stopped, but they can be swallowed in sound. It's not just the flute. Other families hire boys with lutes, trained not for beauty but for rhythm, stationed just outside private rooms to play in loops until dismissed. Some even bring caged birds into inner chambers, teaching them to trill at dusk, covering sighs with song. A wealthy widow you once knew had an African parrot that shrieked so comically during her baths that no one could ever say for sure what she was doing within. You tilt your head back now, watching the stone freeze above you. Dionysus reclines there, eternal and relaxed, surrounded by vines and women, his face carved into a knowing smile. The Romans, for all their statues and discipline, were not prudish. Desire was a part of life, discussed in poetry, displayed in frescoes, even sculpted into household gods. But they were also obsessed with dignitas, that aura of self-respect, public composure, control, and so, even in marriage, even in pleasure, one had to guard the illusion of grace. not because intimacy was shameful, but because inelegance was. And there is nothing less elegant in the Roman mind than the echo of a bodily sound, unbidden, unchoreographed, bouncing from wall to wall like a drunk senator at Saturnalia. So they covered it. They masked it in music, in voices, in firecrackle and rustling leaves. Entire garden layouts were designed to include water features near bedrooms, shallow pools or wall fountains, so the constant murmur of flowing water could serve as both cool relief and acoustic camouflage. You recall a visit to a villa outside Tiber, where a mosaic of Neptune sprawled across the floor of the triclinium, and a narrow marble pipe along the ceiling trickled water from one corner of the room to the other. It wasn't merely decorative. The owner, a friend of your father's, had 5 daughters, and he was a modest man. You sip the rest of your wine, now barely more than perfume, and listen again. The flute has stopped. The garden is quiet once more, but the spell remains. The sound still lingers, just enough to remember what it covered and why it mattered. You turn your gaze back to your spouse. They raise an eyebrow, and without a word you both stand and move into the shadowed corridor together. Tomorrow you'll rise early. There's a banquet to plan, and your new Syrian cook has promised a honeyed dish no one can pronounce. But tonight, the house is a whisper, and the marble remembers only the music. The corridor curves gently, lined with oil lamps set into wall niches, their flames low and lazy, casting long, soft shadows. Your bare feet step quietly over the cool tiles, patterned in black and white. The silence here is not absolute, it's deliberate. In a Roman domus, silence was rare and curated, not the absence of sound, but the presence of control. You pause beside a curtain and listen. Somewhere behind it, a slave breathes lightly in sleep. You recognize the rhythm. It is Aulus, the boy your uncle purchased from Hispania last winter, barely 14, chosen not for his strength or skill, but for his quietness. He sleeps near your chamber not for convenience, but for sound. Servants in ancient Rome are not simply labourers or attendants. They are instruments of privacy, woven into the architecture of the house. They know when to cough, when to pour wine, when to shuffle sandals just enough to veil the sound of laughter, or something more intimate. They move through space not as people with their own sounds, but as buffers for yours. A well-trained slave is more than useful. He is acoustically loyal. You step inside your chamber, drawing the curtain behind you, not fully closing it. There are no solid bedroom doors in most Roman homes. Curtains suffice, and even those are luxuries for the wealthier families. The domus was designed for movement and airflow, not for seclusion. This is not a private world. It is a shared one. Every breath, every misstep, every moment that breaks the pattern of polite noise becomes audible, traceable, memorable. And so, couples like you learn to train the world around them. Slaves were taught to anticipate the rhythm of the night, to arrange not just trays and bedding, but ambient sound. Aulus, for instance, knows to enter the chamber in the evening clumsily enough to make footfalls that echo. He drops the corner of the linen on purpose, lets the amphora clink against its stand. Not because he's careless, but because he's careful. These sounds are permission. They signal life, movement, and they drown the sound of a creaking bed or a whispered name. At the edge of your chamber another slave waits. Her name is Phyla, and she is older, quiet, exact. She tends to the fabrics, folding them, unfurling them, brushing them. Her hands move constantly and fabric rustles under her touch. She's the oldest noise in the room. Even now she folds a fresh stola, her fingers creating a soft rhythm as natural as breath. You do not dismiss her. You never do. She remains in the corner, her back turned, and that is enough. She has served your family for 20 years. She knows what her presence allows. In this world, the arrangement of people is as important as the arrangement of stone. The house itself may betray you, with its marble that remembers and amplifies, but the people within it are trained to forget. Or to pretend they do, and not just out of duty. Aulus and Feli may be slaves, but they are embedded in the ritual of the household. Their silence is not just obedience, it is participation. This is Rome. There are sounds that are sanctioned, and others that must be disguised. And for all its frankness about sex and flesh, Roman culture demands a certain performance of decorum. Even in a marriage, even in desire, one must be careful not to seem uncomposed. That is the greatest crime, not indulgence, but the loss of poise. So the household conspires to protect you. Slaves sweep noisily near the chamber walls. Water is poured. Coals are stirred with deliberate clatter. Someone even walks the corridor with sandals a little heavier than necessary, pacing just far enough to provide a constant dull rhythm. And sometimes, when all else fails, you speak aloud. Anything, nothing, just to produce sound. You quote lines from Virgil, feign a debate over a date, ask about olives. These are not conversations, they are shields. Even the gods play a part. Shrines are positioned in places where noise might carry, near the baths or the guest rooms. The clinking of bronze votive offerings, the muttered prayers of passing slaves, all contribute to a layer of sacred distraction. You lie back now on the bed, the linen cool against your skin. Your partner is beside you again, a hand resting lightly on your wrist. And beyond the curtain, Aulus stirs. You hear his sandals drag once across the stone, hear File exhale through her nose as she folds another garment. They do not speak, they never do, but they are there. They are the house's ears, trained not to hear. They are the house's walls, softened by ritual. The marble still sings, but it sings quiet at night. You wake briefly before dawn, not fully conscious, not fully resting, caught in the thin line of awareness that floats just above sleep. The bed beneath you doesn't creak. It shifts, heavy, weighted with carved wood and old linen, but it makes no noise now. The air is still cool, holding the final grip of night, and beyond the walls the city stirs quietly. Early carts, hooves muffled with cloth, the low mutter of a baker's boy lighting a fire down the street. You lie there, listening not for the sounds outside but for the silence within. It's never quite empty. The house speaks in low tones, even when no one does. A breeze draws down the hall. A pigeon moves on the roof tiles. The flame in the hallway lamp sighs, and still the marble waits. You rise eventually, stepping again onto that mosaic floor, careful with your steps. The patterns beneath your feet tell stories, Theseus and the labyrinth perhaps, or Europa borne away by the bull, but their colour has faded slightly in the night. The stone always looks paler in the morning. You cross the atrium and into the tablinum, where scrolls are organised across a cedar shelf, and small busts of your ancestors look on, fixed and impassive. There are no doors here either. Curtains hang heavy, but do not meet the floor. Columns rise like ribs from one space to the next, and there is no true division. This is Roman architecture. A domus is meant to display, to open. It is a house for seeing, and being seen. It was never built for secrecy. Privacy, as you understand it, is a modern desire. But in ancient Rome, it did not quite exist. The Roman elite cultivated reputation, not solitude. Rooms were arranged to show off wealth, education, lineage. The domus itself was an argument, a performance, a declaration of status. The closer your bedchamber to the atrium, the more important your presence. Guests passed easily from one space to another. You ate where you worked, slept near where you bathed, prayed beside where you punished your servants. The family rooms opened onto shared gardens. The guest quarters lay just steps from the mistress's chamber. Nothing stood between you and the eyes of others, except good behaviour, and so you adapted. The cubiculum was never large. Sometimes it held no more than a bed, a coffer, and a single stool, and if it was placed on the second floor, if your family had one, it might have a wooden floor above the shop or the servants' quarters. The walls, still marble or at best plaster on lath, carried sound like silk carries scent. Even the most private of acts became a kind of shared knowledge, which meant the best thing you could do was control the narrative rather than hide it. You remember your uncle's villa near Ostia, where the bedroom opened not onto a hallway but directly into the triclinium. He boasted of it, claimed it allowed him to join the feast late without missing the start. But everyone knew it also meant that his second wife, young, vibrant, noisy, was never more than a curtain away from the guests. And so the musicians at his dinners played louder than most, and the feasts lasted longer than usual. That was how you built privacy here, not through construction, but through distraction. Your own domus, though modest by comparison, follows the same pattern. The bedroom where you slept, or didn't sleep, is nestled between a vestibule and the lararium, the family shrine, a place where slaves pass regularly to make offerings, to pour small libations, to whisper names of the dead. Their rituals provide a kind of rhythm to the walls. It isn't privacy, but it is cover. These soft layers of noise, ceremony and motion, make it possible to move through life in a structure that refuses to hide you. You've often wondered whether the builders considered this, whether the men who laid down mortar, stacked travertine, sanded the floors, whether they thought about what it meant to build a house that listened. But perhaps that was never the point. These homes were meant to endure, to be passed down, to be filled again and again. A house wasn't designed around a couple, it was designed around a name. You return to the central courtyard and stop, listening to the splash of water in the impluvium. The fountain's slow trickle is steady, ancient. The marble lip is worn smooth from decades of collecting rain and echoing footsteps. You watch as a leaf drops gently onto the water's surface and spins. It's a small thing. But in this space, even that makes a sound. And you remember what an architect once told your father, standing in the half-built frame of a new estate outside the city. Stone lives longer than modesty. If you want privacy, build with mud. If you want legacy, accept the echo. The sun begins to rise now and the house wakes with it. The servants move with purpose. The kitchen door swings open. A voice calls for firewood. Another asks for vinegar. And just like that, the house becomes loud again. Not with laughter or shame or secrets, but with the business of the day. That too is a kind of shield. The morning noise will bury the memory of the night's whispers. It always does. The street outside is stirring with purposeful energy as you pass through the vestibule, stepping out beneath the shadow of the lintel into the coolness of early morning. The paving stones are damp, holding the last of the night's condensation, and the smell of yesterday's fish market still clings to the alley wall in the distance, mingling with the fresher scents of baking bread and crushed mint from the neighbouring taberna. You move through the street not quickly, but with the precise dignity expected of someone in your position, someone known, someone watched. The Roman world sees you even when it doesn't look directly. Neighbours glance from balconies. A vendor lifts a hand without pausing his work. The slave driving a mule steps aside without a word. Your reputation precedes you, folds around you, becomes you. And with it comes a code, invisible but omnipresent, the etiquette of noise. In Rome, there is no law against the sounds a person makes in the privacy of their home, but there is something stronger, custom, mos maiorum, the expectation of behaviour inherited from centuries of ancestors and wrapped tightly around every waking action. You know this code, even if no one has ever written it for you. It was taught not with scrolls, but with glances, with silence, with laughter that stops a second too late. Some sounds are expected, a low conversation behind a curtain, a quiet exclamation of pain or pleasure, brief, modest, natural. These are tolerated, even forgiven. The walls may echo them, but the house has been trained to pretend it didn't. The slaves will not mention it. The guests will not shift in their seats. A friend may raise an eyebrow, but nothing more. This is part of life, they will say, as long as it is brief, controlled, discreet. Other noises, though, the uncontrolled, the unmistakable, the bodily, those are different. Not because they are rare, but because they threaten the illusion of Roman grace, composure, elegance. To moan too long, to cry out without refinement, to let slip the wrong kind of sound in the wrong part of the house, this is not scandalous, it is embarrassing, a loss of gravitas, and once lost, such things are not easily regained. You remember an afternoon gathering some years ago, a simple summer meal hosted by a cousin known for his fine wines and his slightly too young wife. The guests had reclined in the peristyle, half drunk on Falernian and gossip, when a sound, a clear, rhythmic, unmistakably intimate sound, echoed faintly from the upper level. It lasted only a moment. A hush followed. No one spoke of it directly, but a senator's wife looked briefly at the ceiling and smiled just slightly. Later that month, your cousin's name failed to appear on a list of dinner invitations that would have otherwise been routine. Not a punishment, just a quiet turning away. One does not need to be exiled to be excluded, and yet the rules are not applied equally. A powerful man may be granted more leniency. His noises, if heard, are often dismissed as appetite. A woman of status, though, must be careful. Her noises must never suggest loss of control, even in pleasure, especially in pleasure. There are entire poems, Catullus, Juvenal, Martial, mocking women for the wrong kinds of sounds, for vocalizing with too much passion, too much abandon. These aren't just jokes, they're warnings. Laughter, in Rome, is always political. You pass beneath a vine-draped archway into the market quarter now, brushing close to rows of hanging fabrics dyed in soft ochre and red. The hum of conversation thickens. A man shouts prices, a girl laughs, a baker claps flour from his hands. These sounds are open, unshamed, accepted, but they belong outside. The home, especially a domus, is a different theatre. Inside, every sound is a performance, one judged not on truth, but on its ability to preserve grace. And so, Roman couples developed strategies. Sounds were shaped, redirected, wrapped in context. A cough inserted at the right moment, a shuffle of feet, a question called out just before the moment broke. These were small techniques, but essential, because once a sound escapes unguarded, it cannot be retrieved. It joins the memory of the house. The walls may be marble, but Roman etiquette is far less forgiving. Even in your own home, you remember moments where control faltered. A laugh too loud during a private game. A stumble that knocked over a low table. A breath drawn in too suddenly. The reaction was always the same. A pause, not scolding, not mockery, but something worse. Acknowledgement. And then slowly, life resumed, but altered. Just slightly. Like a garment that's been folded incorrectly and can't quite be smoothed again. But etiquette, for all its sharpness, also had its grey spaces. Within a marriage, within the limits of home, there were unspoken allowances. If your reputation was solid, your name clean, your slaves well behaved, and your friends loyal, you could afford the occasional lapse. A whispered joke, a door shut just slightly too hard, a night when the flute girl was absent and the silence too large to fill. These were moments no one mentioned aloud, but everyone remembered. You passed through the Subura at mid-morning, moving downhill now, away from the patrician homes and into the beating, tangled heart of the city. The domus gives way to insula, the towering apartment blocks where the vast majority of Rome lives, narrow rooms stacked upon one another, thin walls made from cracked plaster and wood, and entire lives compressed into shared space. Here, noise is not masked, it is constant. Cries of vendors rise with the steam from cooking pots. Babies shriek, arguments unravel across balconies. Lovers laugh behind doorways not built to close. The etiquette you know so well, the quiet games of the upper class do not live here. Here, noise is not shameful, it is survival. But not everyone here is poor, and not everyone is bound by marriage. You pass beneath an awning strung loosely between two buildings, and for a moment the sun disappears. Just inside, tucked between a tavern and a barber's shop, is a doorway framed with painted red columns and a faded fresco of Venus, her robe slipping from one shoulder. The door is open. It always is. This is not a brothel. Not officially. Not all such houses are marked with phallic signs or crude inscriptions. Some are far more elegant, carefully curated spaces where courtesans, educated, refined, trained, receive their clients with art and conversation as much as with touch. You pause, only briefly, and glance within. The chamber beyond is small but rich. The cushions are foreign, the wine amphorae painted, the air sweetened with Syrian incense. And there, seated casually on a low couch, is a woman with a lyre across her lap. She's playing softly, not for the client reclined beside her, but for the room itself. Her fingers move lazily over the strings. Her eyes are sharp. She knows her trade, and it is not just beauty. It is atmosphere. Here too the question of noise is present, but it is different. In the world of courtesans, sound is not suppressed. It is orchestrated, controlled, a performance. Clients come not just for pleasure, but for permission. Permission to forget the rigidity of Roman etiquette, to play a role that society would deny them elsewhere. The moans here are not accidents. They are deliberate, practiced. The creaking of the couch, the rustle of silk, the half-laughed whispers, they are part of the illusion, just like the painted backdrop on a stage. And make no mistake, Rome is obsessed with theatre. The city bleeds performance. From the forum to the amphitheatre to the bedroom, everything is crafted to be seen, heard, and remembered the right way. Even desire must have its form, its structure. Courtesans understand this better than senators. They know how to guide a man not only with touch, but with timing. How to speak softly when the street is loud. How to raise their voice when the room needs covering sound. Some use bells, some use song, some, more daring still, use silence like a knife. You remember a story told at a banquet, half drunkenly, of a courtesan who claimed she could finish her work without making a single sound. Not from her, not from him. She lay her client on a bed of straw woven tightly beneath layered linen, closed the shutters, set the lamp inside a carved stone sconce that muffled the flame, and moved with such precision that the client thought himself inside a dream. No one heard, but afterward he paid her double, not for the act but for the mastery. Silence in that house had become the most expensive performance of all. You move on now, away from the doorway and back into the stream of the street. A column of donkeys passes. 2 men argue over the price of cabbage. Somewhere above you, on the second story of an insula, a couple is shouting, not in anger, but in pleasure, uninhibited and unashamed. Their laughter spills from the window and is lost in the street below. And here, in this part of Rome, no one cares. No one looks up. Because here, the sound of a lover's is not a scandal. It's part of the day. But you're not from here. You come from a world where dignity matters, where the bed is placed near the wall not for light or warmth, but for the angle of sound, where you do not sing when you desire, but breathe more quietly, where everything, even your pleasure, must be shaped into something almost invisible. And so you walk home again through the chaos, thinking of that courtesan with her lyre, and of the curtain that separated her room from the tavern's noise. A thin barrier, perhaps, but not meaningless. In Rome, there is always a curtain, between what is done and what is shown, between what is said and what is heard, between the sound itself and its purpose. You return through the Calian hill quarter, where the air smells faintly of heated brick and crushed bay leaf, and turn toward the massive complex just beyond the olive stalls, the baths of Caracalla. The sun is higher now, the streets louder, and your tunic sticks lightly to your back. Around you, other citizens make their way toward the same destination, some carrying bundles, others only oil flasks and strigils wrapped in linen. This is not a place of secrecy, not like the Domus. This is the open theatre of Roman hygiene, the communal sanctum of heat, water, and bare skin. But here too noise plays its strange layered role. You pass through the tall entrance arch and step into a different world. The scent hits you first: sweat, cedar oil, warm marble, and ash from the hippocaust below. Slaves move past you with practiced indifference, sandals tapping against the stone, their arms full of towels and bronze tools. Somewhere deeper inside, someone laughs, a high, sudden bark of amusement, and it bounces off the vaulted ceiling like a drumbeat. These spaces are designed to carry sound. They are shaped for it. The ceilings stretch impossibly high, coffered and domed, catching even the softest splash and casting it back, magnified and distorted. In the frigidarium, the cold room, a whispered greeting can be heard across the pool. In the tepidarium, footsteps blend with water sloshing over tile, creating a constant pulse beneath the breath of steam. The caldarium is worst of all. You enter slowly, the air instantly heavier, pressed against your skin like a damp curtain. The steam obscures shape and distance, figures moving in ghostly half-forms, voices softened but never gone. Even here, stripped and sweating, you're not alone. No one is. That is the point. These baths are for everyone. Senator, freedman, merchant, slave. Side by side, skin to skin. The body is exposed, but the self, what lies beneath, remains carefully guarded. And yet, the human body cannot help itself. It coughs, it grunts, it gasps under the sudden sting of cold water, or groans when rubbed too hard with the edge of the strigil. These are accepted sounds, the noise of exertion, of cleanliness, of the living body doing what it must. But there are limits. You know them. Everyone does. To lose control here, to cry out without necessity, to allow the body's more private rhythms to echo freely through these stone chambers, is not merely impolite, it is remembered. Even among the steam and sweat there is performance. A proper Roman bather sighs, perhaps. He breathes deeply. He may even hum as the oil is applied, but he does not moan. He does not speak of pleasure in tones that suggest anything other than hygiene. And above all, he does not fart. The stone is merciless. Once you recall a young man, wealthy, well-connected, slipped as he entered the Laconicum and landed badly. The fall itself wasn't shameful, but what escaped from him as he hit the floor, an involuntary noise, animal, echoing, broke the illusion of decorum so fully that no one in the room could continue their conversations. For a moment, all was still. Then someone coughed. Someone else laughed, too quickly. The sound clung to the ceiling. Later the boy was seen less often at the baths. His name became a soft joke passed between chambered whispers, not for injury, but for noise. You lower yourself into the pool now, letting the cold water fold around your body. Across from you, a pair of old men speak in low tones, their voices lost in the splash of another bather diving in behind them. A slave crouches nearby with a clay pot of oils. The acoustics here are perfect. Every sound is layered, nothing solitary, everything part of a larger rhythm. Even your own movements are absorbed, rewritten by the space. This too is part of Roman life, the creation of sound camouflage. Not silence, but sound that behaves properly. And in that the baths are a kind of sanctuary, not from noise but from the wrong kind of it, not from exposure but from judgment. Everyone makes noise here, but only the right kind. The grunts, the footfalls, the scooping of water, and every person present knows instinctively which sounds are allowed and which are not. You close your eyes and lean back against the edge of the pool. The stone at your spine is cool, polished from centuries of use. Above you, the ceiling curves in elegant symmetry, a perfect arch. Sound moves around you but does not touch you. For a moment, you are just another body in water, breathing in time with the echoes. When you rise, the slaves are ready. They hand you your towel without comment. No one looks at you twice. This is the Roman ideal. Not invisibility, but discretion. Not privacy, but poise. You leave the caldarium and move through the outer chamber toward the exit arch again. As you pass, a child slips and splashes. A woman scolds him in Greek. Somewhere, someone sings softly to himself in a dialect you don't know. All of it echoes, and all of it is permitted. You return home at midday, body warm from the baths, skin faintly slick with oil. The domus is quieter now, sunk into the slow stillness that settles over the city between noon and the 9th hour. The servants speak only in soft tones, and the cook, who started the morning loud with instructions, now pads about barefoot, preparing lentils in near silence. A low breeze moves through the house, curling beneath the arches and curling the edge of the curtain that leads to your sleeping chamber. You do not enter immediately. Instead, you pause in the atrium, watching how the sunlight turns the surface of the impluvium into a sheet of gold. The marble walls around you gleam faintly with that same soft light. Still beautiful, still impossible. They will not soften for you. They will not forgive. And so, the household has learned to shape the world around the walls instead. Padded chairs, thick rugs, heavy drapery. These are not only displays of wealth, they are part of an invisible infrastructure of modesty. You glance at the lectus in the corner of the room, a low, wide couch covered in dyed wool, its cushions plump and gently faded. A new guest might think it was merely for comfort, but you know. The stuffing, goosefeather and shredded flax, is arranged deliberately, and the wooden joints were tightened not by carpenters but by servants trained to listen. A loose joint, a misfitted peg, those things produce sound, and sound in this house is unacceptable unless it's chosen. Your chamber is the best example. You step inside now and see it just as it was left. Dark fabric draped over the walls, not for warmth, but for sound. Pomegranates stitched in faded gold thread win their way across the blue backdrop, an aesthetic gesture that hides its purpose. Beneath the tapestries is another layer, wool padding, fixed directly to the wall, invisible unless peeled back. It was added after an incident months ago when a guest in the next room overheard a private conversation, not scandalous, but poorly timed. The next day, your spouse ordered the changes made, quietly, without question, because the shame wasn't in being heard, it was in not preventing it. You sit now on the edge of the bed. The mattress, if it can be called that, is thick with woven horsehair and reed. It shifts only slightly beneath you, barely enough to creak. The wooden frame is reinforced beneath with ropes pulled tight enough to absorb motion, to suppress movement. You remember the day the household slaves retightened them, crouched beneath the bed frame with their arms straining against the rope, adjusting it not for comfort, but for silence. The luxury of the elite is never just about softness, it's about control. Every item here has been chosen for its ability to mute the unwanted. Linen sheets instead of rough wool. Silk hangings from Alexandria, not just to display wealth, but to billow gently in the breeze without snapping. Even the perfume that lingers in the corners of the room, frankincense, myrrh, and a touch of imported cinnamon, is applied not only to the body but to the air itself. Smell masks sound in subtle ways. If a visitor catches the sharp edge of pleasure on the wind, but it arrives mingled with sweet scent, it becomes easier to ignore. A sensual fog, a polite curtain. There is a stool at the end of the bed, carved with scenes of Artemis and her nymphs bathing. Figures arranged in stillness, bodies half exposed yet serene. You run a hand over the edge, feeling the wood's smoothness. Even here the decoration is a distraction. The message is one of sanctioned intimacy. Pure, mythic, bloodless. Something no one can object to. And yet, there are times when even all this preparation fails. You remember one night, not long ago, when a pillow slipped from the bed and hit the floor with a surprisingly loud thud. It echoed against the wall and rolled once before stopping. It was such a small thing. And yet in the morning, one of the slaves paused in the hall with a glance that lingered a second too long. Not malicious, not even surprised, but knowing. You didn't speak of it, nor did your spouse. But that evening, without being asked, the slaves added another rug to the floor beside the bed. Thicker, heavier. A new silence layered upon the old. Rome doesn't ask you to avoid intimacy. It asks you to conceal its shape. Even passion must be polished. You walk now to the corner of the chamber and draw back a fold of the drapery, revealing the small wooden chest tucked behind it. Inside are scrolls, a jar of scented oil, a comb, and a small wind instrument. A syrinx, a pan flute. You've never learned to play it properly, but you keep it because your partner likes the sound, and sometimes, when the house feels too large, too silent, you blow across it gently, just enough to make a note. Not music, just presence, a controlled sound, a companion to whatever happens next. The domus is silent again now. Outside, the street has quieted with the noon heat. Inside, no voice rises. The house is listening, but it hears nothing, because everything that might be heard has already been planned. The heat softens into afternoon as you step beyond the inner rooms, across the shaded colonnade, and into the villa garden. Your family's country estate rests on a low rise south of the city, past the Appian Way, where the air is drier, the wind carries dust instead of smoke, and the marble statues are older than the house itself. A fig tree leans slightly against the wall, offering crooked shade over the stone path, and the buzzing of cicadas has grown steady and thick like static. The air smells of rosemary and warm limestone, and laughter, distant, rising, real. You follow the sound. It comes from the eastern garden court, past the fish pond where silver-scaled carp drift beneath a floating reed mat. There, gathered under the pergola, are your friends, relatives, clients, a few guests still lingering from the feast 2 days before. Reclining on low couches, spilling wine and olives, their sandals kicked carelessly onto the steps. The usual decorum has slackened here, slowly and purposefully, and you recognise the signs. Loosened hair, missing togas, uncovered arms, a lack of titles in conversation. These are the signs of intentional informality, a rare permission, granted only within certain thresholds of familiarity. You step in, greeted by a smirk and a raised cup. One of the younger men quotes a line from Plautus, something lewd about a miller's wife and the sound of her bedroom door, and the others howl with laughter, not because the joke is new, but because the timing is precise. Someone claps their hands against the wooden table, and the cicadas are briefly drowned by human noise. This is not the kind of laughter you hear in the city. This is villa laughter, countryside laughter. It carries no risk because the walls here are wide, the rooms distant, the staff loyal or absent. Here, the rules bend. Not completely, not carelessly, but just enough. You seat yourself at the edge of the gathering, and someone pours you wine, unasked. Your fingers trail across the linen of the cushion, worn smooth from days in the sun. Across from you, a woman leans close to her lover, not her husband, and murmurs something that causes him to snort, choke on his drink and shake his head in theatrical protest. The sound is clear, unpolished, imperfect. No one corrects it. These villas, these summer escapes, serve as a space where Roman identity loosens its corset. The marble is still here, of course. So are the gods, the busts, the order. But they lean back slightly, they exhale, and in their moment of breath, people behave not as statues, but as animals with culture. Laughter here is sometimes planned, but often allowed to wander, and noise, once the greatest enemy of dignity, is tolerated, even encouraged, if it brings release. You think of how tightly you live in the city, how you sleep beside padded walls, how you train your voice to fall only within the sanctioned range of polite affection, how even your pleasure is measured out in half sounds and whispered phrases. But here, in this garden, someone burps loudly, someone else applauds, a woman sings off key in Latinized Greek, and still, no shame arises, because this is a temporary place, a theatre of relaxation, a controlled undoing. Of course, it doesn't last. It never does. You recall last summer, when a senator's wife grew too comfortable during a similar gathering. She let slip a story, just a small one, about the noises her husband made after too much wine. The laughter that followed was genuine, sharp, delighted. But 2 weeks later, her husband withdrew his support for her cousin's candidacy. Not publicly, just a quiet subtraction. Decorum, even when broken for fun, never forgets. But within these walls, for now, the forgetting is allowed. You watch as someone begins to recount a dream, a ridiculous, vulgar dream involving a flute girl and a jug of olive oil. And the group leans in, knowing the story will end in sound. Not the dignified kind, not poetry, but groans, gasps, shrieks of laughter. This is not shame, it is relief. Even the house seems to sigh. The terracotta tiles overhead warm in the sun. A breeze rustles the curtain hung lazily across the western portico. Somewhere inside, a dog barks once and is quieted with a soft whistle. You notice a pillow on the floor, thrown during a story earlier, no one remembers exactly how, and the corner of a wine-stained napkin tucked between two flagstones. These are the marks of permitted disorder, the temporary breakdown of the marble's memory. Because in these villa moments, Romans do what they cannot in the city. They practice noise, so that they can return to silence better prepared. And still, even now, the careful ones watch themselves. The woman with the off-key song pauses, listens to herself, and lowers her voice. The man with the laugh too loud steps away for water. A slave in the background strikes the wind chime not once, but twice, a subtle signal. Enough. The sound softens. The group settles. Plates are passed. Eyes turn toward the horizon, the fields. The moment fades not with silence, but with ritual quieting. The slow, deliberate turning of volume into memory. You sip the rest of your wine. The taste has dulled. The cup is warm in your hand, and though no one says it, you all understand. The noise was real, and it was safe, but it cannot stay. You will return to your domus, to the walls that echo, to the bed that listens, to the flute, to the sounds you hide. But for now, you listen to the breeze move through the garden once more, and remember what laughter sounded like when marble forgot. Evening comes softly in Rome, not with silence, but with subtle transitions. The light narrows between columns, the market voices recede, and the city turns inward. You sit beneath a lamplight in the study, alone for now, with a scroll laid open on your lap. The walls around you are darkened not by paint, but by time. Bronze sconces tarnished at the edges, wooden shelves bowed slightly under the weight of memory. The oil lamp burns with a thin flame, its scent faintly bitter, and the scroll in your hands is older than you are, Martial, or maybe Catullus. You don't need to check the seal to know, the tone is too familiar. You begin to read, not aloud, never aloud, and as the lines unfold beneath your eyes, you remember that the poets, those disreputable, beloved, half-mad poets, they heard everything. They wrote it down too, shamelessly, beautifully. Catullus wrote of beds creaking, of moans behind closed doors, of lovers whose passion left scratches on shoulders and bruises on reputations. Martial was cruder, funnier, but no less precise. He chronicled the noises of Rome's nights as if keeping a civic record. Groaning from cheap brothels, rhythmic pounding from the flats above, the unmistakable thump of a bedboard against thin plaster in a boarding house where 4 other tenants tried to sleep. His verses crackle with sound. Not noble sound, human sound. And yet, for all their vulgarity, the poets knew the line, because they lived behind the same walls you do. They heard what you hear. They knew that the creak of a floorboard in the wrong rhythm meant something other than footsteps, that a sharp breath taken just too loudly might travel 2 rooms away. that the hush after certain sounds was worse than the sounds themselves. Even Ovid, charming, exiled, Ovid, filled his Ars Amatoria with advice on not only seduction, but discretion. In Book 3, he even jokes about how to move quietly, how to avoid letting the servants hear too much, how to draw curtains at just the right time, not to block the light, but the echo. He knew. Of course he did. The poets always do. But there is something else buried beneath their jokes and sighs and crude metaphors. Something you feel now as you pause mid-verse and glance toward the hallway, where the lamplight just touches the edge of a curtain. A kind of melancholy. Because even as they described the noises, they also mourned them. Not because they were shameful, but because they were so brief. The sound of laughter from a bed behind a thin wall. The soft gasp of a lover's name mispronounced in heat. The accidental thump of knees against stone. All of it gone in seconds and remembered only in poems. These noises, awkward, intimate, indecorous, were tiny ruptures in Rome's elegant mask, and the poets loved them because they were real. You run your fingers over the edge of the parchment, feeling the soft crackle beneath your skin. This copy is old. The ink bleeds in places, the letters thicken and fade, but the voice is still there, still sly, still warm, still uncomfortably familiar. It occurs to you that for all their defiance, the poets never really escaped the architecture of silence. They mocked it. They slipped past it. But even they framed their noise in verse, in rhythm, in control. Their rebellion was still performance, still shaped, still aware of the listener. You stand now, leaving the scroll behind, and move into the corridor. The house is quieter than before, not asleep but waiting. The slaves are in their quarters, the doors are latched, the city's roar has faded to a low hum. And for a moment, you think of how many nights have passed like this, in this very place. How many breaths held, how many words whispered, how many sounds swallowed by marble and forgotten, or almost forgotten. Because even when the walls say nothing, the poets remember. They remember the woman in the upper room whose footsteps fell unevenly when she rose at night to drink. They remember the man who laughed too loud in his own bed and was overheard by a senator's wife. They remember the servant girl who sang to drown out her master's sighs, and the boy who learned to pace the garden at the right time, just so the floorboards above could groan in peace. And you remember them now, too. You return to your chamber and lie down slowly, not out of exhaustion, but thought. You stare at the ceiling. The beams above are blackened from age, but solid. They hold. Like everything else in this house, they are old, elegant, and unspoken. You wonder if somewhere, far from here, another person lies awake beneath the same kind of ceiling. Perhaps with a scroll in hand, perhaps with memories of their own awkward nights. Perhaps trying, as you are, to measure the distance between shame and laughter. And maybe, just maybe, they are thinking of the same poem you are. A line you once read beneath a different lamp. A line that made you laugh, then pause. Let the neighbours hear if they must. Let the gods blush. Only the silent are forgotten. The poets knew. They always knew. You pass beneath the arch of the velabrum the following morning, walking slowly, hands clasped behind your back, as if strolling through your own memory. The sun climbs behind a thin veil of cloud, casting the forum in a pale, forgiving light. Vendors are only just beginning to lift their wares onto wooden counters. Bakers, flour-dusted and drowsy, open shutters to the street. Rome is waking, but its oldest places never fully sleep. The marble stones here are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, rain and ceremony, and every corner echoes, if not with voices, then with echoes of rituals that once were. You're heading toward the temple of Venus Erycina, perched near the western slope of the Capitoline. It's not the most famous of the goddess's shrines, nor the grandest, but it is old, and its history is tangled with love and power and secrets. You reach the steps and pause, looking up at the columns, slender, Corinthian, fluted and darkened at their base with city soot. The door is open, as it often is. These are not temples closed by time or faith. Rome still believes in her gods, still fears them. You step inside. The air shifts, cooler, still, scented faintly with crushed laurel and burnt myrrh. Inside, the walls are covered in faded frescoes, Venus crowned with myrtle, surrounded by attendants with half-bared breasts and downturned gazes. A priestess kneels near the altar, her tunic loose at the shoulders, whispering a prayer you cannot hear, And yet, even here, in the house of the goddess of love, there is silence. Not total, but ritual, controlled, expected. Because temples, more than homes, are governed by the most rigid acoustics of all. Rome's deities are ancient, venerable. Each one holds jurisdiction not just over human lives, but over their sounds. Juno hears weddings. Bacchus tolerates songs. Mercury listens to merchants. But Venus listens differently. Her temples are filled not with laughter or noise, but with restrained tension, the same that lives in the pause before touch, or in the breath before a name is said out loud. Her domain is desire, but not indulgence. She does not shout. She does not sing. She waits. You walk further into the cellar where the statue stands. Carved of pale stone, her drapery falling in impossible softness, she looks forward with the gaze of someone who already knows what you're about to say. Her presence is less comforting than expected. She's not motherly. She's not sweet. She's aware. You think of the stories, half-remembered verses, warnings dressed as myths. Lovers caught within her temples, drawn by passion, undone by sound. One tale speaks of a young man and woman who, in the secrecy of midnight, met behind the temple's rear colonnade. The moon lit only half the courtyard. They believed themselves alone, but their whispers echoed, their laughter carried. The gods, the story goes, are patient, but they are not deaf. The priestess stirs behind you, standing now, collecting ashes from the base of the altar. She moves with slow grace, as though her every motion is a ritual. You hear the soft pat of her sandals against stone. You wonder how many vows she has overheard in this place, how many stifled sobs or trembling confessions or even names half-gasped in stolen moments. Not all visitors to Venus come for prayer. Some come for permission, not often, not openly. But sometimes, here or in other smaller shrines, lovers pass through the sacred threshold and believe that divinity means discretion, that in the goddess's name, their noises might be swallowed by incense, their secrets protected by walls built for devotion. But gods listen more closely than servants, and temples are built from the most echoing stones of all. You turn now, moving past the statue, fingers grazing the edge of the altar. It is warm, worn. Too many hands have touched it over too many years. You step through a side corridor where torchlight flickers against plastered walls. The passage leads to a small chamber, seldom used, open to the sky above. In the centre is a round stone basin where rainwater gathers. Birds sometimes nest above, and now one sings. Clear, rhythmic, indifferent. You know this chamber's purpose. A place for private petitions, for intimate oaths. Some come here to ask for love, others for fertility. A few come simply to speak aloud what they cannot say anywhere else. The acoustics here are strange. The basin catches sound. A whisper spoken toward the water will not echo. It will simply vanish. It is no accident. Rome's architects, even in sacred spaces, understood that desire needs protection. Not freedom, not noise, but containment. You sit beside the basin for a while, listening not to words, but to the absence of them. The priestess moves somewhere behind the wall. The bird continues to sing. A leaf falls silently from the opening above, lands on the surface of the water, and drifts. You think again of all the marble walls you've lived behind, all the moments where sound had to be hidden, shaped, softened. You think of the poets, of the laughter in the villa, of the slave girl's footsteps, of the pan flute that waits in your chamber. And you think of Venus, watching, listening, never quite smiling. The divine understands what mortals pretend not to, that even love, even pleasure must know its place, its rhythm, its limit. You rise. The offering you brought remains untouched at the altar, a sprig of mint and a folded square of dyed linen. Not valuable, but deliberate. You do not speak as you leave the temple. There is no need. Outside, the city resumes. A donkey brays in the distance. A hammer strikes wood. A child calls out in song. All of it chaotic, all of it human. But behind you, in the temple, silence holds. The sun has begun to slip behind the rooftops as you cross the narrow lanes behind the Forum Boreum, the air turning cooler now, tinged with the scent of olive brine, crushed grapes and smoke from the public kitchens. The streets are still full but slowing, the merchants weary, the laughter thinner, more brittle. You pause beside a column where a girl is chalking a notice onto a board. Something about a performance, a name you recognise, a play you've seen twice before. The stylus squeaks against the surface, and as you read the names of the cast, something ancient stirs in you. A mask, a gesture, a single, stylised laugh. The theatre in Rome is not just entertainment. It is a mirror, a rehearsal, a school. The masks come first to mind. The visored faces of tragedy and comedy, exaggerated in form, with gaping mouths and furrowed brows. You have seen them up close in the backstage chambers of the Theatrum Marcelli, hanging on pegs like sleeping ghosts. They are made of linen soaked in plaster, or sometimes of cork painted in bold strokes, carved wide to project voice. The mouths are not realistic, they are acoustic tools, resonating chambers. Their purpose is not only to show a face, but to amplify sound, to carry it from stage to the furthest marble tier. And so every Roman knows, almost from birth, that sound is not accidental. It is crafted. You reach the small open-air theatre just before the quarter hour, stepping onto its stone risers as the audience settles around you. The actors are already on stage, their movements deliberate, their voices measured. The play is a farce, a familiar one, full of slapstick and sexual innuendo. The characters are exaggerated types, the cunning slave, the lustful old man, the suspicious wife. The audience laughs on cue, the same lines every time, but the laughter still comes, and it's here, in this ritual repetition, that you realise just how deeply the Roman household is influenced by the sound logic of the stage. At home, you and your spouse act out scenes no less practised. The silence before a guest enters the atrium, the polite cough offered when a curtain is not quite drawn, the performance of accidental noises, carefully arranged to appear unplanned. Even your slaves understand the rhythm. A dropped amphora to mask a thump, a song hummed at the right time, a sudden need to sweep the corridor outside your cubiculum. These are not coincidences. They are learned techniques, lifted from the stage, rewritten for marble. You watch now as the actor playing the adolescens, the young lover, tiptoes across the stage in sandals too large, each step landing with a slap designed to echo, to announce his presence even in supposed stealth. The effect is comic, familiar, and you think of your own life, where stealth is never real, where footsteps in the night are always heard, always recorded, even when the listener pretends otherwise. The play ends with a burst of applause, the cast bows, the chorus sings a final couplet, and the crowd begins to disperse. You stay seated for a moment, watching the torches flicker as they're extinguished one by one. The masks have been removed. The actors, now ordinary men and women again, slip behind the curtain, voices dropping into softer tones. But the auditorium still holds the shape of their sound. As you rise, you recall how some households, particularly those with wealth or ambition, hire actors during private gatherings, not to perform full plays, but to recite short monologues, sing, or even laugh at appropriate moments, especially during feasts when noise must be kept high enough to cover whatever other sounds may come. These hired performers often do not know they are providing cover. They are simply told to amuse, but the host knows, and the guests know, and sometimes even the walls seem to know. One friend of yours, a clever merchant who married above his class, once arranged a miniature playlet to be staged in the courtyard whenever he and his wife retired early. A bawdy comedy about mistaken identities, filled with so much shouting and laughter that the rest of the house could hardly hear itself think, and thus it could hardly hear anything else. You pass through the alley behind the stage now, your sandals tapping lightly across the worn slabs, your mind still echoing with the lines of the performance, and you wonder, did the actors, when they first wore those masks centuries ago, know that they were not just entertaining the city, but teaching it how to behave, how to sound, how to not sound, how to transform the awkward into the acceptable? Even now, the tones of the Roman theatre shape your nightly rituals. The half-murmured lines exchanged in bed, the theatrical groan of a stool moved just a bit too forcefully, the curtain drawn as if in haste, though it was entirely deliberate, the way you breathe, the way you wait, the way you let a sound pass and pretend not to notice. The play ends, but the performance never does. You re-enter the domus under a soft purple sky, and for a moment you feel it again, that quiet tension beneath the day's final act. The domus awaits its next scene, and you, its actor, must decide how loudly to move. The entrance of the domus is quiet when you return, but not silent. The kind of quiet that is shaped, not left behind. Somewhere near the atrium you hear the gentle splash of water being poured into a bronze basin. A broom swishes across the mosaic floor. A faint scent of lavender oil, spilled, perhaps, or recently uncorked, floats through the air, mixing with the remains of the kitchen fire and the colder smell of stone cooling after a warm day. You step carefully over the threshold and your foot lands just short of the basin. A servant boy glances up from his work, startled, and apologises. His cheeks flush. You nod, not unkindly, and move on. You know what he's doing, and more importantly, you know why. Because sometimes the floor must be made to seem slippery. Not just in the literal sense, the damp mosaic, the water left unwiped, but in the social sense. In Rome, where marble and plaster betray every private moment, accidents serve as the most useful alibi of all. A dropped tray, a toppled stool, a jug that cracked without provocation. These are the polite explanations for noises that cannot be explained. And everyone plays along. You remember the first time your own chamber slave used the excuse. It was years ago. A loud crash had echoed down the corridor late at night. You and your partner had been uncareful. No flute, no cover. The house was too quiet. The rhythm unmistakable. In the morning, before anything could be said, before eyes could meet in suspicion or amusement, the boy had appeared in the atrium with a shattered amphora in a towel and a simple phrase, "I dropped it, Domine, during the night." No one asked for more. That was the point. In the domus, accidents are mercy. A gift between those who hear and those who do not wish to be heard. And like any performance, they require rehearsal, precision, and above all, timing. Some of the wealthier households plan them with remarkable flair. A slave instructed to pass by the master's door precisely at the second hour, holding a metal tray stacked with cheap utensils. A clatter, a curse, and suddenly, whatever happened behind the curtain a moment earlier is no longer the loudest thing in the house. You've seen it at dinner parties too. A couple retires early, and 15 minutes later a servant stumbles into a column holding an oil lamp. The resulting clang echoes through the villa. Everyone gasps, chuckles, checks for fire, and then forgets what they might have heard from the guest chamber. Even gestures are used. You once watched a matron raise her hand during a conversation and spill her wine. Just slightly. Just enough to stain the tablecloth and draw eyes away from the open window behind her, where a faint rhythm had begun to betray itself. The spill was cleaned in seconds. The noise behind the window stopped. No one commented. The stain was ignored, but everyone understood. And yet these accidents are not only about dignity, they are about solidarity. A household, if well managed, becomes a single organism, with every member understanding the balance between sound and silence. The cook knows when to rattle pots a bit louder. The chambermaid knows when to push the shutters closed more forcefully. Even the dog knows when to bark. And when something truly unmentionable occurs, when the noise is too loud, the wall too thin, the moment too obvious, the excuse is already waiting. A thunderstorm in clear skies, a migraine with no symptoms, a loose tile, a nervous twitch, anything but the truth. Because to admit the truth would be to break the shared illusion that holds Roman life together, that everything is under control, that the body, the voice, the flesh are always obedient to the will. You recall one particular evening in the villa at Tiber, hosted by a minor magistrate and his famously quiet wife. They had placed your couch near a side wall facing a marble niche with a poorly sculpted bust of Cicero. During the meal, a sound rose from the floor above, repetitive, unavoidable. A rhythm not caused by footsteps. It lasted perhaps 12 seconds. You saw eyes widen. A guest smirked behind his goblet. Then a crash, a scream. A slave appeared from nowhere, clutching her foot and pointing to a fallen amphora. It had broken perfectly. Too perfectly. The wine spread like spilled blood across the tiles. The noise was forgotten, and as the magistrate's wife returned to the room moments later, smoothing her hair, her sandals clicking softly on the now slick floor, no one looked at her directly. No one needed to. The excuse had been offered, the balance preserved. You move now through your own chamber, eyes adjusting to the dusky light. Your partner is there already, seated by the small table, arranging a dish of honeyed dates. The curtain to the corridor hangs slightly crooked, and a small jug rests near the edge of the stand, placed so carefully it can fall with a nudge. It isn't clumsy. It's prepared, just in case. You don't speak. You sit beside them, and for a long moment nothing moves. Then you reach for a date, and the jug accidentally tips over. It strikes the floor with a gentle clink. No damage, just enough noise. And somewhere in the hallway, footsteps pause, then continue. There's something almost cruel about a whisper in a Roman house. Not because of what it says, but because of what it implies. That you're hiding something, and that everyone nearby is supposed to pretend they didn't hear it. You sit now beneath the high ceiling of the tablinum, where the scrolls are stacked in quiet rows, their clay seals intact. The air here smells of old wood and waxed leather. Outside, the triclinium is being prepared for an evening guest. Low voices drift through the corridor, broken only by the soft rustle of linen as the tablecloths are arranged. You're meant to be reading. But you're not. You're thinking of the whisper you overheard this morning. It wasn't meant for you. It never is. It came from just beyond the vestibule. 2 women, faces veiled, lingering after a visit. One of them said something about a merchant. The other replied, barely audible. Just the name of a street, a month, and a laugh. The kind of laugh that carries farther than the words themselves. Not crude, not loud, but pointed. In a house like this, you hear whispers like that all the time. Because marble does not silence, it distorts. And when something is distorted, it becomes more dangerous than if it were said clearly. You rise slowly and walk through the western corridor where the walls are narrower, the ceiling lower. It's here, in these tight spaces, that whispers travel most efficiently. One word said near the staircase can be heard at the end of the hall, not because the speaker raised their voice, but because the sound snakes its way along plaster and beam like smoke. It loses its context, its volume, but not its tone. The whisper game is older than the Republic, and in Roman households it is constant. A network of breathless messages pass through curtains, across thresholds, behind fans. Messages about affairs, about debts, about strange noises behind thin walls, about you. Sometimes even the walls themselves seem to listen. You remember an evening not long ago in another house, seated near a column that split the dining room from the peristyle. A guest whispered something into his cup, nothing more than 2 syllables, and 4 diners turned their heads in response. Not because they heard the words, but because they felt the message. It changed the atmosphere like spilled vinegar. The most dangerous thing about a whisper isn't what it says. It's that it dares to be heard. It invites interpretation, suspicion, echo. In your own domus, the servants are trained to speak clearly, loudly even. Their duties, their movements, their permissions, everything above the level of ambiguity. This is not only discipline, it is protection. If a slave whispers in the wrong place at the wrong time, it implies secrecy. If they're overheard, and the meaning is unclear, it becomes gossip. And gossip in Rome is often fatal. So the whispered things are reserved. For wives, for children, for visitors, for lovers, especially lovers. The shared glance across a garden. The murmured word as a bowl is passed. The half-breathed compliment behind a curtain during a festival. These are more than moments. They are announcements, not of affection, but of intimacy. And intimacy, when whispered, is rarely private for long. You pause now at the doorway of your partner's chamber. They're not inside, but the lamp is lit. A single note rests on the low table. Folded parchment, a name written in delicate ink. The name is familiar. A senator's son. Harmless, boring, beautiful. You smile, just slightly. You don't open the note. You don't need to. You heard the whisper last week when your partner spoke to him at the games. You heard it even though you couldn't make out the words. You heard it in the silence that followed. Rome's walls may not be generous with privacy, but they are generous with implication. And so, like everyone else, you've learned not to react. When the whispers rise, you shift the conversation. When the curtain rustles, you clear your throat. When you hear your name, followed by laughter that isn't quite kind, you offer a toast. The real skill is not in preventing the whisper. That's impossible. The real skill is in surviving it. You return to your own chamber now. A small tapestry flutters against the window frame. You draw it back, and outside 2 women walk past the house, veiled, speaking close to each other. You can't hear what they say, but you know you were just mentioned. You close the window and let the curtain fall. The household stirs again as the sky turns violet. The kitchen reawakens first, a rhythm of clatter and flame as iron pans are set on glowing coals. You hear it from your chamber, the hiss of water poured onto stone, the soft chop of figs against a wooden board, the sharp call of a name repeated until answered. The sounds are all known to you, not chaotic, not accidental. These are the sounds of servitude, arranged like tools in the hand of a careful master. You rise slowly, letting your feet touch the cool floor, and think, not of your own comfort, but of those whose lives are spent managing yours. In this house, as in any Roman domus, the enslaved are everywhere and nowhere. You do not always see them, but you hear them. Their existence is auditory before it is visual. A cough outside your door to signal readiness. The brushing of linen over mosaic to announce a new day. The quiet cough in the atrium as someone waits with news. The rhythm of their world is constant, measured in sound, never still, never fully silent. You step into the corridor and a boy passes you with a tray. His name is Crito, and he does not speak unless asked. But you know his pattern, the way his sandals drag slightly, the tiny click of his thumb against the metal cup when he's nervous. You recognize him not by sight, but by the music of his movement. That is how it works. In Rome, the enslaved have no formal presence, no identity in marble or bronze, but they resonate, and they must be careful. Too loud, and they are clumsy. Too quiet, and they are suspicious. A slave who moves with unnatural silence invites unease. A slave who laughs too freely risks familiarity. So they perform balance. They exist just within the boundary of usefulness. Audible, but never intrusive. Present, but never fully known. There is a girl, Nisa, tasked with lighting the lamps. You've never once caught her looking you directly in the eye, but each evening, without fail, she walks the periphery of the atrium and lights the wicks with a rhythm so consistent you can tell the time by it. She drops the flintstone once, always at the fourth lamp, and always mutters a curse in a dialect no one else in the house speaks. You've come to expect it. Her voice is part of the furniture now, familiar, contained. But not all sounds are tolerated. A slave who groans while lifting a pot is weak. One who sighs audibly during folding is insolent. One who hums too long in the garden is distracted. There is a code, ancient and unwritten, that governs the soundscape of their labour. They must speak clearly but briefly, respond without echo, and vanish before being noticed. They must never be the loudest sound in a room, and when night falls their presence is reduced to breath. You remember once, early in your marriage, when your partner's chamber slave, a boy of perhaps 12, let out a sneeze during a moment of closeness. It was small, involuntary, the tiniest explosion of breath, but it cut the room like glass. The rhythm was broken. Your partner turned, eyes sharp. The boy bowed, eyes wide, already halfway into apology. He was not punished, but he never slept close again. Sound, for them, is not just communication, it is currency. The right sound at the right time is worth more than obedience. A door knocked softly during a tense discussion. A tray dropped loudly during a scandalous pause. A laugh inserted into the silence between insults. These things buy favour, buy time, buy safety. And when noise betrays them, it is often fatal. You pass through the peristyle now where the evening meal is being arranged. A slave girl arranges grapes on a dish, the fruit tapping gently against bronze. She does not speak. She does not sing. She is beautiful, and so she is quiet. Beauty and silence are paired in Roman minds, not because beauty lacks thought, but because beauty should not interrupt. When she does speak, it is with a calculated whisper. That whisper, heard from the guest quarters last week, started a conversation that has not yet ended. You sit now in the triclinium, reclining as the first course arrives, a low dish of dates soaked in wine. Your household steward, a Gaul with silvering temples, stands just outside the doorway. He doesn't speak, but you can hear his hand tapping against the doorframe, an old habit. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It used to annoy you, now it comforts you. Without it, the house feels too still, too private, too exposed. Because the truth, though few admit it, is that Romans rely on these sounds to protect their own. The noises of the enslaved, carefully curated, dutifully performed, form the background music of aristocratic life. Without them, the silence would become unbearable, too revealing, too sharp. Their footsteps blur your mistakes. Their movements cover your embarrassment. Their voices give your secrets just enough echo to become untraceable, and yet you never ask what they hear. Because they hear everything. They know who visits late, who argues behind tapestries, who weeps in the bath, who breathes harder than they should in the middle of the second hour. You pretend they don't know, but they do, and so do you. And so the agreement is struck, wordless, ancient. You allow them to move, to make just enough sound to veil your own. And in return, they say nothing. They erase their knowing. They fold it like linen and stack it with the rest. And the domus breathes evenly again. The triclinium glows with lamplight now, every flame reflected on polished bronze and lacquered wood, flickering in the glaze of pottery and the dark surface of watered wine. Guests recline on couches set in a U around the low dining table, their heads tilted toward each other in practised ease. A silver dish is passed, quail eggs and garum still warm from the fire, and hands reach for them without speaking. The first hour of the evening meal is always quiet. Conversation comes later, once the wine has softened the edges of memory. But already the walls are beginning to listen. This evening is not formal. There are no senators present, no poets performing verses. These are friends, business associates, family members distant enough to entertain without needing to impress. You have chosen them carefully. No rivals, no gossip mongers. Just enough familiarity to speak freely, but not so much that secrets will be repeated, or so you tell yourself. The layout is typical. The triclinium faces the garden, open to the cooling air of the courtyard. Columns frame the space in rhythm. Light, shadow, light, shadow. Behind one wall, the guest chambers. Behind the other, your private rooms, your bed, your partner. A space divided not by bricks, but by intention. And it's not enough. Because in Rome, even a single wall is a stage curtain, thin and unreliable. You take a sip of wine and hear a laugh from behind the partition, not from the dinner guests, but from the far chamber. The laugh is brief, low, too private. You glance at the others, no one reacts. But you know some of them heard it. Not the sound itself, but the change in air. The way the room paused for a breath. You know what's happening. The wall is thin. Not in construction. No Roman house would be poorly built, but in spirit. It holds its structure, but not its silence. Every vibration becomes a suggestion. Every creak becomes a rumour. You shift on the couch, suddenly too aware of the proximity of the rooms, the proximity of bodies, of movement, of that kind of sound. You're not angry, not yet. The timing was careless, but not cruel, and it's not unfamiliar. You've played this game before, because in Rome, the symposium of shadows is not always limited to the dining room. After the first course, when the olives have been cleared and the fig cake begins to melt into the plates, the conversation loosens. One man tells a story about a girl he once pursued, very loudly. Another jokes about a lamp that wouldn't stay lit, and the slaves who had to relight it again and again, each time walking in at the wrong moment. The guests laugh, a little too forcefully. They know what they're doing. It's a form of cover. Because when the noises behind the wall become undeniable, when the rhythm changes, and fabric slides audibly against skin, and something is said a little too loudly for plausible denial, the guests perform their part. One coughs. Another reaches to refill a goblet, knocking it over by accident. A third asks for music, and a servant appears with a lyre, and begins plucking a tune so dull it becomes a kind of sonic plaster. The room becomes louder, as if to pretend it never heard anything at all, and the wall remains. Not just the physical one, the painted plaster separating your feast from your partner's pleasure, but the social one, the wall of non-interference, of agreed silence. Later, after the guests have departed, you'll walk past the chamber and find it quiet. You'll open the door and the scent of perfume will linger too long. Your partner may smile, may not. No words will be exchanged about what did or did not happen, because everything will have already been explained, by way of noise. This is not betrayal, not in the Roman sense. This is part of the house's natural rhythm. The domus allows for it, even facilitates it. You've done the same, on other nights, with other guests. Because proximity creates not only tension, but permission. There's something about the closeness of walls that makes desire more vivid. You've felt it yourself. The thrill of being overheard, the careful modulation of sound to almost give it away. The gasp softened into a moan, the moan shaped into silence. It becomes a game of acoustics, a language of deliberate restraint. And for the guests too, there is pleasure in pretending not to know. They hear the noise and think of their own evenings, their own thin walls, their own well-timed accidents. They smile behind their cups and perform forgetfulness with exquisite grace. The house, meanwhile, stores everything. The wall remembers the laughter, the plaster remembers the rhythm, the mosaics beneath your feet remember where footsteps stopped and started again. The house becomes a score, a music of movement and memory, written not in notes but in timbre. And tonight, the song is almost finished. You retire alone. The triclinium is empty, and the torches are burning lower now. In the hallway, a servant arranges the lamps so that their flames hiss but do not flicker. You walk past the guest chamber without turning your head. You hear nothing. But that's the loudest sound of all. You wake before dawn, not from dreams, but from the faint sound of movement. Wood shifting against wood, then stillness. You lie in your bed and listen, eyes open, breath even. The sound came from your own lectus, the frame beneath you adjusting slightly as you rolled. But it wasn't just any bed frame. It was a statement, built not only for comfort, but for sound, or the lack of it. In Rome, even furniture speaks. The bed you lie in is carved from olive wood, heavy, stable, bound with thick rope underneath rather than nailed slats. The legs are wide and silent. You remember when it was commissioned, your mother insisted on it. Not for your rest, she said, but for your reputation. A noisy bed, she warned, says too much about the wrong parts of your life, and in Roman society sound betrays far more than words ever could. Every domus tells a story, and furniture is part of that narrative. It isn't just ornament, it's instrumental. The lectus was not a private piece of furniture in the Roman imagination. It's in the dining room, it's in the study, it's in the centre of every painted fresco showing philosophers, lovers, kings and liars. It is where you eat, sleep, speak, read, make love, give birth, die. And so its construction must reflect control. A man who sleeps on a creaking bed might as well shout his shame through the forum. You sit up now, pushing the linen aside, and glance down at the polished feet of the frame. They are thick, flared, carved with laurel leaves. Decorative, yes, but more importantly weighted. Their mass reduces motion. The artisans who built it knew this. They carved it not to flex, but to contain. Some families take it further, reinforcing the frames with internal blocks, wedging leather between slats to cushion vibration, applying wax to every joint. Not for comfort, for discretion. You've seen the same thing in houses wealthier than your own. Beds so stiff they barely move, cushions stuffed with fabric instead of air to absorb movement. You once spent a night in such a chamber, lying on a surface that didn't even shift under you. It was like sleeping on a stage, everything perfectly composed, completely artificial. And yet, the opposite is also true. In some homes, the beds are loud on purpose. You remember visiting a merchant friend in Trastevere, a man with too much wine and too many opinions. His bed frame squealed with every shift. You heard it from the corridor, heard it laugh and creak like a theatre prop. He didn't apologise. He smiled. He wanted it known. He wanted Rome to hear. Not just that he had company, but that he could afford it, could command it, could advertise it. Because in a world where sound equals risk, embracing that sound becomes a kind of power. You've heard stories of courtesans who install bells in their headboards, small ones, golden, hidden within the joints. When the bed rocks, the bells chime, soft and unmistakable, not to distract, to announce. These are women whose income depends on being spoken of, their pleasure, their artistry, their volume, broadcasted through walls and hallways so that no one forgets. You lie back again now, pressing your weight into the mattress, and the frame does not stir. Silent, obedient, the way it was built to be. But you wonder, as you often do, whether that silence hides more than it protects. Because sometimes, too much quiet draws suspicion. A marriage without sound, a chamber without creak, a lover without breath. These things become conversation. The absence of expected noise becomes its own kind of rumour. There's a balance to be struck. The ideal Roman bed frame says, I am dignified, but not cold. I am capable, but not theatrical. I can support desire, but I do not advertise it. That's the goal, to speak just enough, through the wood and the mattress and the gentle roll of linen, to suggest that passion exists but never in excess, and it's not just the bed, chairs, stools, even the pulvinar, the sacred couch where the gods themselves are symbolically seated during festivals, all of them speak in wood and sound. A chair that groans under weight is a signal. A stool that clatters to the floor becomes the punctuation at the end of a whispered sentence. You've seen how the arrangement of a single chair can change the energy of a room, how a guest positioned too close to a curtain becomes a threat. Furniture in Rome is language, without words. You rise at last, drawing your tunic over your shoulders, and step to the window. The city is just beginning to stretch. A cart rolls past, a dog barks at nothing. The house behind you is still asleep, or pretending to be. You rest your hand on the foot of the bed frame before you leave. It is smooth and solid, a symbol of your life, your restraint, your understanding of what must be heard and what must never be. The frame says nothing back, but it remembers. You walk through the city in late morning, past physicians' stalls and apothecaries tucked under shaded porticos, past jars of honeyed figs and vinegar tinctures, past the sharp smell of boiled herbs and the duller scent of linen soaked in rosewater. Rome, for all its brutality, cares deeply about health. Its elite bathe daily. Its physicians command respect. Its streets are lined with the tools of bodily management. But for all the effort placed in preserving life, Roman medicine remains deeply suspicious of pleasure, and more than that, of the sound of pleasure. You pause outside the Atrolipti, the massage stall near the Forum, where two men recline on wooden benches, their torsos bare, their bodies being rubbed down with warm oil. The masseurs are methodical, almost priestly, their hands pressing the flesh in firm, silent rhythm. No groaning, no laughter, no comment. Even in treatment, the body's expected to behave, to cooperate, to express need, but not indulgence. Inside, a physician prepares a draught of silphium, the rarest of herbs, and possibly the most dangerous. You've heard rumours that it prevents pregnancy, that it dries desire, that it stills the body's excesses. Whether it works or not, it's always administered in silence. The Roman understanding of the body is not purely anatomical, it is moral. The humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, must be balanced not only by diet or climate, but by behaviour. And few behaviours are more threatening to this balance than the loss of vocal restraint. A quiet breath in the midst of intimacy, acceptable. A murmur, tolerated, but a loud moan, a gasp, a cry that breaks the expected rhythm of speech. These are symptoms, not expressions. The Roman physician Galen once wrote that ungoverned passion created violent tremors of the diaphragm and should be treated as any other seizure. Not with sympathy, but with correction. You remember reading that line. It made you close the scroll slowly and wonder just how many sounds you've swallowed in your own life. Not because they were wrong, but because someone once told you they were unhealthy. There's an irony to it, of course. Rome celebrates virility, power, sexual conquest. Paintings in villas show gods and mortals tangled in bliss. Statues display anatomy with impossible detail, but those are images, frozen, sculpted, perfect. They make no noise. Real pleasure, with its sweat and its awkwardness, its rhythm and rupture, threatens that image, especially when it's loud. You think now of the various cures once offered to women believed to moan too much during sex. Fumigations, diet changes, visits to Venus's temple. A physician might even suggest marriage to fix the problem, as if a more socially sanctioned partner would somehow remove the sound. Of course, it was never about the partner. It was about the fact that a woman had dared to let something internal become audible, and men were not exempt. A man who cried out too loudly was suspected of passivity, of softness. He was not masculine enough to absorb his own sensation. His body responded too freely, as if it had its own will. Roman masculinity was not about desire, it was about dominance, and dominance does not make noise when it climaxes. So moaning became an exile, a sound to be muffled, not only for the sake of reputation, but for wellness. The doctor and the gossip whispered the same warning. If you cannot contain your sounds, you cannot contain yourself. You pass now into the quieter streets beyond the market, where the air grows cooler and the buildings stand closer together. A thin woman sweeps the doorway of a midwife's house. She glances up at you, then down again. You know her. She once delivered your sister's second child. She's known for being kind, for staying longer than she's paid, for teaching young mothers how to breathe without making too much noise. Because even in childbirth, there are rules. You once asked her, half curiously, half sincerely, "Does it matter if they scream?" And she answered, "Only if someone hears." You step now through the threshold of your own domus, and as the familiar sounds greet you, the water trickling into the basin, the low rhythm of footsteps on stone, you realise how carefully the architecture of your life has been built around that fear. The fear that the body might speak too clearly. Because in Rome, the body's allowed to feel, but it must not be heard. And when it is, the diagnosis is not joy, it is failure. You enter your chamber and sit beside the low table. A scroll lies open, fragments of Soranus, the obstetrician. You scan the lines for something merciful, something forgiving. Instead, you find lists, prescriptions, instructions on when to be silent, on how to breathe, on how not to cry out. The walls are quiet again, but you begin to understand it's not because pleasure doesn't exist here, it's because it's been trained to whisper, or worse, trained to vanish. There's a difference between a sound that's overheard and a sound that's noticed. One slips into the room like incense, acknowledged, then allowed to dissolve. The other enters like a knife. It's early afternoon, and the domus is swollen with heat. The walls breathe it back slowly, exhaling warmth that seeps from plaster and tile. You've retreated to the far chamber to avoid the worst of it, where the light filters through a blue-dyed curtain, painting soft shadows across the stone. You sit beneath the breeze from an open oculus, sipping wine that's gone too warm, watching the dust catch sunlight. All of it quiet, slow, until you hear it. A laugh. Not your own, not a servant's, not a guest. It's the laugh that follows a pause. That sharp, clear thing that comes only when someone didn't expect to be heard and wasn't careful enough not to be. And worse still, it comes from the guest chamber. You set your cup down slowly. You know the layout of the house too well. You know the placement of every door and curtain, and you know this. That curtain should have been drawn. That one, thin, utterly symbolic piece of linen, meant to divide what is seen from what is assumed, was left open. The laugh came through unobstructed. You rise, you don't rush, you don't need to. The damage has already happened. You step into the corridor, feet whispering over mosaic, and move toward the atrium. There are no cries, no footsteps scattering in panic. Just low voices, steady but too close. Someone is speaking in a voice that isn't formal, too soft, too intimate, a rhythm you know too well, a cadence of privacy that has failed to remain private. You pause at the colonnade. You don't need to go any further, because the damage isn't just in the sound itself, it's in what happens next. A guest sits in the atrium, fingers trailing through a shallow dish of water, pretending not to listen. A cousin passes by more slowly than necessary. A slave kneels to pick up a jug that does not need moving. They've all heard it, and worse, they've noticed it. And now it's no longer a whisper. It's no longer something that can be explained away with a sneeze or a dropped amphora or the wind. The curtain wasn't closed. That laugh was unfiltered. It passed directly through the air and into the ear of someone who was not meant to receive it. And in Rome, that makes it public. There are rules, so many rules, about who may sleep with whom, about how, about when. But even these rules are flexible in private. The one rule that is not is this. Do not force others to acknowledge what they should not be made to know. Noise without containment is not just a mistake, it is a scandal. And scandals in this city are not always made of sex or betrayal. They are made of sound. The right person hearing the wrong thing becomes a pivot on which entire careers turn. A careless sigh near the wrong column, a moan overheard by a client, a servant too slow to hum at the right moment. These are the things that bring down houses. You remember the case of a senator's daughter, young, wealthy, carefully raised. She had a lover. Everyone knew. No one minded. The arrangement was discreet. The villa was remote. But one night, a visiting poet walked past her chamber and heard too much. A laugh, a name, a line of verse repeated with too much tenderness. The next morning he included the sound in a poem. Didn't name her, but described the room, the marble, the exact colour of the bedding. She was sent away within the week, not because of what she did, but because she allowed someone to hear it. You return to your seat. You pick up the cup again. The wine has gone flat. It doesn't matter. The damage has been done, and the house now has a shape it didn't have before. The laugh that passed through the open curtain is being passed again, in glances, in pauses, in careful phrasing over the evening meal. And your partner? They won't mention it. Neither will you. Not directly. Because doing so would require naming the sound, and naming it gives it permanence. So instead, there will be a new pattern. That chamber will remain closed for some time. The curtain will always be drawn, even when no one is inside. A flute player may be hired, a guest may be subtly disinvited, a cousin will be moved to another room, and a slave replaced, and the laugh will never be repeated, but it will be remembered by the guests, by the walls, and by you. Because some sounds don't echo through stone, they echo through reputation. The house is unusually quiet the next day. Not heavy, no one speaks in hushed tones, no servants creep down the halls, but quiet in the deliberate way that follows a mistake. You notice it in how the kitchen clatter is soft, how the linens are folded with extra care, how even the dog barks only once before thinking better of it. The echo of last night's laughter has settled like dust across every surface. No one mentions it, but everyone has begun to compensate. And yet, not all sounds carry shame. Some are meant to be heard. You walk through the garden, sandals brushing the stone, the shadows long and narrow between columns. The house breathes slowly, its walls warming in the sun. It's here, beneath this shifting geometry of light and silence, that the games used to happen. Not children's games, but lovers' games. Played with no board, no dice, only walls and echoes. A subtle warfare of acoustics. You remember the couple who once stayed in the Western guest quarters, friends of your partners, married, but not to each other. They arrived together but entered separately, never touched, barely spoke. And yet at night, from opposite sides of the garden, you would hear voices, never loud, always paced like poetry. Not conversation, not confession, just fragments. Words released into space. The garden had been designed, cleverly, though never explicitly, for sound. The curved apses along the wall, the hollow columns, the echo chamber behind the central fountain. You could whisper in one corner and hear it land across the lawn like a dropped pin. The lovers knew this. They'd mastered it. They played with it. One would stand near the fountain and say a line, perhaps from Ovid, perhaps made up, and minutes later another voice would answer, softer, from behind the pomegranate tree. The house never saw them together, but it heard them flirt with the walls. Sometimes the sounds weren't even words, a breath, a hum, the strike of sandal against stone in a pattern too regular to be accidental. Once, a flute, played badly, offered a half melody that trailed off the moment the echo reached the second-floor balcony. And still, no one ever said anything. Not because they were discreet, but because they were artful. Rome tolerates many things when they are done with style. You lean against the ivy-wrapped column now, eyes closed. Try it yourself. You speak a name, not loud, not whispered, just enough to send it into the corridor. It bounces once, then disappears. You imagine someone else hearing it and pretending not to. That's how the game works. The house becomes the messenger. The echo becomes the seduction. There are stories, some true, some imagined, of couples who left notes not in letters, but in acoustics. A scrape of furniture against mosaic to say I'm awake. 3 deliberate steps in the hallway at the hour before sleep to say, come. A tap on the basin to say, don't. These were lovers who couldn't risk letters, who couldn't risk touch, who instead memorized the house's voice and used it as a shared language. In some homes the architecture was altered for this purpose. Domes that carried whispers across rooms, pipes embedded in stone that carried messages like breath. Even a few villas, wealthy, strange, excessive, built entirely around sound, with floors that sang and walls that resonated like drums. Not for music, for messages. It makes sense. In a society where everyone listens and no one speaks, where the wrong sound can mean exile and the right one can mean affection, acoustics become a kind of intimacy. One safer than flesh. One more enduring than letters. A secret coded in air. You return now to the far side of the garden, where the wall curves slightly around a small bench. You sit and wait, and then you say it again. The name. Soft. Measured. Letting the wall take it from your lips. A second passes, then another, and then somewhere deep in the corridor a step. Not rushed, not random. One, then two. You recognise the rhythm. It's a reply. The morning arrives not with birdsong or sunlight, but with a tray. It appears beside your bed at the usual time, slightly earlier than the 6th hour. A clay cup of watered wine, one cut fig, a sliver of cheese. The linen folded precisely. A servant places it silently, nods without eye contact and vanishes. Nothing is said. And that, of course, is the first signal. Because in a Roman household, the morning after a noise, after an echo, after a breach, is not about confession. It's about choreography. About everyone moving through the house exactly as they normally would, with just enough difference to acknowledge that everything has changed. You sit up slowly. The room smells faintly of smoke and lavender, the same scent that was burned last night in the brazier outside your partner's chamber. Not unusual, but tonight the brazier had been stirred too often. Someone had ensured that the smoke lingered in the corridor longer than it needed to. Another signal, a signal that said, "We heard. We saw nothing, but we will remember." You eat the fig without hunger, chewing slowly, listening. Outside in the atrium the household resumes its shape. Servants move at an even pace, deliberate, not hurried. Voices remain low, but not suspiciously so. One laughs at a spilled pomegranate seed. Another curses the wax that's cracked in the lamp holder. And still, everything feels arranged. Because it is. This is how the Roman house protects itself, with performance. Last night, a curtain was left open. A laugh echoed through a room that should have remained quiet. A guest turned too slowly. A cousin caught your eye too long. You didn't need to speak of it then. But this morning, the domus will speak for you. You dress in silence and step into the corridor. Already you can see the signs of subtle rearrangement. The flowers in the impluvium have been changed. No longer fresh-cut lilies, but fronds of acanthus, less fragrant, less conspicuous. The guest rooms are being cleaned unusually early. A servant girl lingers longer than she should beside the kitchen wall, folding the same cloth 3 times. At the lararium, the shrine to your household gods, someone has left a fresh offering of honey and figs. Not unheard of, but unnecessary on this day. It's a symbolic reset, a message from the slaves to the gods, and to you. We are still loyal. The house is still whole. The secret is sealed. You pass your partner in the corridor. Your shoulders brush. No one stops. No words. But in that moment, before the gaze drops, before the sandals resume their rhythm, you see it in their eyes. An apology, or a defence, or perhaps nothing at all. The meaning doesn't matter. What matters is that you keep walking. Because in a Roman household, scandal is not defined by what is heard. It is defined by whether or not someone stops. The slaves will not mention what they overheard, not unless they are disloyal or foolish, and yours are neither. They understand the house's true rhythm, the way mistakes are swept behind open shutters, how a rearranged couch becomes a barrier, how laughter at the wrong hour is answered the next day with a coughing fit during breakfast. It is all sound, all carefully shaped, and you've played your part before. You recall months ago when it was your chamber that failed to stay quiet, when the household had reacted not with questions but with rearrangements. A servant had moved your cloak, another had filled the basin too full. Your partner had laughed too loudly over dinner, and a guest had remarked, casually, on how nice the evening breeze was, though none had passed through the house. It had been forgiven, eventually, but not forgotten. Because forgetting is not part of the Roman memory, especially not the memory of houses. They store these things in their floors, in their corners, in the invisible arrangements of their mornings. A household that runs smoothly after a transgression does not do so by chance. It is because everyone understands the language, and now you do too. You return to your chamber and find that your bed has been made with different sheets, slightly rougher, more formal, a gesture of distance, and on the low table a scroll you hadn't asked for. Legal documents you were meant to review 3 days ago suddenly made visible again. Not a reprimand, a suggestion. Return to structure. Return to the script. You sit. You unroll the scroll. You touch the reed pen, though you do not write. Outside, the garden echoes with birdsong. Deliberate, pleasant, harmless. The house is steady again. The sound is gone. But the shape of the silence has changed. You once believed the walls were neutral. They were marble, plaster, Lime. Built to hold up a roof, to frame a life, to display wealth in cool, clean lines. You thought they listened but didn't speak, that they recorded but didn't share. But now, as you move through your house with the eyes of someone who's been overheard, who knows what it means to be noticed, you understand the truth. The architecture gossips. Not loudly, not maliciously, but with the quiet confidence of a slave who served in one house too long and seen too much. A wall never lies, but it hints, and it always remembers. You run your hand now along the edge of a fresco, Venus and Mars locked in their divine embrace, arms twisted around each other in the moment before they're caught. The plaster has flaked in the corner, revealing the brown-grey underlayer where time has stripped the gloss. You can still see the outline of Mars's hand on Venus's hip, a perfectly rendered thumb, faded but firm. You know who chose this painting, your grandmother. She had it commissioned after your father's first successful legal case, her way of honouring love and victory and inheritance all at once. But also, perhaps, her way of warning. Even gods are seen when they think themselves hidden. This is the kind of house that tells on you without words. The room beside the atrium, once a quiet reading chamber, has become something else. A couch was moved last month. You didn't move it, but someone did. It now faces the door instead of the window, just far enough from the curtain to allow someone to pass through unseen. A guest noticed. You saw their eyes glance at the mark left on the tile where the couch once stood. You saw the pause in their speech, the faint upward curve of their lip. That was the house speaking. Even the walls themselves have begun to shift. That spot beside the doorway where fingers rest too often, where your partner leans when they think they're alone, has begun to polish. Not chipped, not stained, just shined. A glossy smudge of habit. The plaster is smooth there, unlike the rest. A record of tension, of waiting, of hesitation repeated often enough to become visible. Architecture betrays rhythm. It tells who paces where, which steps fall heavier at night than during the day, which curtain flutters for reasons other than breeze. You once noticed a thin line of worn stone on the stairway, a slight dip where feet land too often, where someone walks without shoes. It wasn't your path, but you knew whose it was. You've stopped trusting the corners of rooms, because corners are where servants whisper, where lovers pause, where someone waits with a tray they do not want to deliver. The corners accumulate sound, not enough to understand, but enough to suspect. If you lean just slightly, you can hear the breath of the house, 100 layered sighs absorbed into wood and paint. Even the ceilings mutter. You remember visiting a senator's home where the dining room ceiling had collapsed, not from poor construction, but from being too finely built. The room beneath had once been a bedroom, the senator's daughter. Her walls had been thick, her curtains heavy, but the ceiling was decorative, meant to impress from below, not protect from above. When it cracked, it revealed not just a structural weakness, but a story of nighttime visitors, of servant boys, of whispered names and slipped sandals. That ceiling ended a marriage. The house spoke, and no one could stop listening. Your own house whispers more quietly, but it whispers all the same. You pass the hallway where the guest once laughed too loudly. The sound no longer echoes, but the mark it left still resonates. The floor has been scrubbed twice since, the curtain replaced, but the architecture remembers. No one lingers there now. Even the slaves walk faster in that corridor, because the house has told them something. And you've started avoiding the fountain after dusk, not because it's unpleasant, but because its curve carries voices in strange ways. You don't know how far your voice travels when you speak near it. You don't know who hears, or what they hear, and so you stay silent. You take the long way to the library. You leave doors open that used to remain shut. You tap the wall before you enter the room. You speak to the house, and in return, it tells you where not to stand. Architecture in Rome is not passive. It is civic, moral, intimate. It contains behaviour, and it also shapes it. The domus is a machine for memory. It records how many times a curtain moves. It knows who walks lightly, and who breathes harder when they pass certain thresholds. The plaster knows things you don't. The mosaic under your feet has learned your gait. The archway between rooms listens more carefully than your steward, and the bed frame, silent though it is, holds more stories than the family shrine. You lean against the column now, the one in the northern peristyle, and feel the vibration of someone walking across the house. You don't know who it is, but the weight and pace tell you everything. You feel it before you hear it. You recognize them, not by their face, but by the way the stone receives them, and you realize this house is no longer just your shelter, it is your witness. By twilight the lamps are lit at the lararium. You pause before them, as expected, 2 steps forward, 1 hand raised, 1 muttered offering. It's perfunctory. You aren't praying for rain, or for a relative's health, or for safe passage by sea. You're praying for discretion, for the house to remain silent, for the events of the past week, the laugh behind the curtain, the guest who turned, the whisper too close to the atrium to stay what they are, a rumour without name. You offer wine, not your best, just enough. The household gods stare back, figures of clay and bronze, their tiny eyes fixed in permanent attention. They are Lares and Penates, protectors of the home, and they do nothing, because they do not intervene. In Rome, the gods are not sentimental. They do not care for small embarrassments or the clumsy choreography of domestic intimacy. They care about order, about sacrifice, about your ability to perform the rituals. They care about being honoured, but they do not help. You know this. You think of the time your cousin begged Venus for silence. He had taken a slave girl to his own chamber foolishly, while the wife's sister was staying in the guest room. The sounds, unmistakable. He prayed to the goddess of love, laid out roses, even hired a flute player to play at her shrine. The next day the sister told her husband, and Venus, radiant and serene, remained carved in stone, holding a dove, eyes upturned. There is no divine courtesy for the awkward. The gods may smile at lovers, but only when they are mythic, untouchable, ideal. When they fall grandly. Helen, Paris, Dido. But you're not in a poem, you're in a domus, and your disasters are too small for Jupiter, too ordinary for Minerva, too petty for Mars. You look now at the shrine. The small hearth is smudged with smoke from last week's overburned offering. The silver tray is missing a fig. No one notices, or pretends not to. A servant passes behind you and clears his throat softly. Not a question. A signal. The meal is ready. You nod and leave the gods behind. They make no sound. They never do. Even the more sensual gods, Bacchus, Venus, even the lesser-known ones, the household spirits of desire and birth, do not concern themselves with domestic sounds. They preside over celebration, not aftermath. They smile in the moment and vanish during the consequences. There's a story, one of your favourite lies, that tells of a woman who prayed to Venus to prevent her from making sound during intimacy, fearing that her neighbours would hear and judge her. She made the offering, she burned the incense, and that night she moaned even louder than before, not because the goddess had ignored her, but because the goddess enjoyed the echo. You smile now, faintly. It's a cruel joke, but a Roman one. Because here, piety does not excuse indiscretion. A priestess can be mocked. A senator's wife can be the subject of dirty graffiti near the Subura. The gods might bless your harvest, but they will not save you from the shame of a poorly timed noise. You've seen it before, at a wedding feast where the bride's cries were heard from the next room during the second hour. Laughter rose, glasses clinked. A friend toasted the groom. The priest at the far end of the table smiled as though nothing had happened. That same priest later whispered the story to a neighbour's ear like a gift wrapped in reverence. The gods watched. The gods did nothing, and what could they do? They rule over fate but not reputation. They control birth and death, not the breath between them. The slow exhale, the gasp, the accidental call of a name too loudly in the night. Those belong to the murmur of humans, not the realm of immortals. So when you kneel now, before your small altar, you know you're not seeking protection. You're performing a ritual of containment. You burn incense not to ask for help, but to distract. The smoke curls upward. The scent spreads. It's not prayer, it's camouflage. One more layer between you and what the house remembers. The gods do not judge, but the marble does, and marble doesn't forget. The night begins quietly. You eat alone. A small meal, bread, olives, honeyed cheese. The bread is too hard, the olives too soft. You don't mind. The silence is what you wanted. The silence is what you asked for without asking. Even the servants seem to understand. They move lightly, slower than usual, as though the floor might splinter if rushed. You've spoken little today. No arguments, no confessions, not even a glance too long toward the guest chamber or your partner's hall. The house has returned to its careful rhythm. And yet, beneath that rhythm, a second one stirs, the kind that precedes a storm. You walk the house after the plates are cleared, passing the colonnades in half-light, the shadows stretched long across mosaic. The air smells faintly of myrrh, a scent left by someone else, in another room. You know it. It trails from certain fabrics. It stays in hallways long after sandals have gone. This house is full of these traces now, not visible, not spoken, but felt. And tonight, the house has chosen not to contain them. You return to your chamber, and the breeze from the atrium carries something strange. A single, muffled sound. Not loud, not dramatic, but different. A name, maybe, or just a vowel. A break in the air. You stop. You wait. The noise comes again, then another. No words, only motion, voice, the sound of someone not alone. You do not move closer. You don't need to. The house has offered no protection this time. No flute music. No cough from a passing servant. No staged accident to drown it. For the first time in this house's long architectural memory, nothing tries to hide it. And that, more than the sound itself, is what stuns you. Because it means the game is over. The curtain is drawn tonight. The door is latched. But it doesn't matter. The sound escapes anyway. Not because it was careless, but because finally it was permitted. Not just by the person who made it, but by the house itself, and by you. You close your eyes, and you realise you don't feel anger or betrayal. You don't feel humiliated. What you feel is recognition. You've made these same sounds, not here, not recently, but once, when you thought no one could hear, or when you wanted someone to, when the risk felt worth the embarrassment, and now it has come back, in a different voice, through a different wall, but it is the same rhythm, the same broken breath, the same echo in the bones of the house. You sit down at the edge of the bed. The bed does not creak. It never does. That has always been the point. You listen. And slowly, you hear something you hadn't expected. You hear joy. Real joy. Not performed, not stifled, not shaped into a polite murmur. It is messy. Beautiful. The sound of someone who no longer believes they must be silent to be safe. And it is not yours. But still, it belongs to you. Because the house belongs to you. Because the sound is carried on your air, across your marble, into your silence. And you realise, the sound was never the problem. It was always the hiding. You lie back, not in defeat, not in sorrow, but in a quiet surrender to what the house has always known. That plaster cannot contain feeling forever. That walls, however thick, eventually remember how to breathe. You close your eyes. You do not try to drown it out. The house is still now, not in absence, but in fullness. The kind of stillness that does not pretend to be silence. The kind of stillness that follows something honest, and knows it does not need to be explained. The sounds from the guest chamber have faded. You do not know when they stopped, only that somehow they didn't disturb you, not because they were quiet, but because they were true. You lie in your bed, awake, aware, listening not for more noise, but for what remains. The room around you is soft with night. The coals in the brazier glow faintly. The faint echo of sandals 2 rooms away shifts across mosaic. A servant preparing the lamps for the morning. The dog turns once in its sleep and settles. No one speaks, but the house, as always, is alive. And for the first time in many nights, it does not feel like it is hiding anything. The walls are not ashamed. The columns are not stiff. The air no longer presses against your chest like a held breath. You understand now what you had always misunderstood. This house, your house, was never built to silence desire. It was built to hold it, to shape it, to let it live quietly, not secretly. You had demanded too much from plaster and marble. You had tried to make them erase, but plaster cannot unhear, and marble is not made for forgetting. You turn your head to the wall beside your bed. It's smooth, pale, cool in the dark. You remember the first time you touched it, the day you moved into this house, the way it caught the afternoon light. You thought then it would be yours forever, that you would grow into it, that your name and your voice would settle into its corners like dust. You were right, but you didn't expect it to know so much of you, because what the walls truly keep is not just sound. They keep rhythm, pattern, change. They remember how many nights you whispered and how many you stayed quiet out of obligation. They know the difference. They knew the first time your partner hesitated before returning to your bed. They knew the name you didn't speak when you lingered too long by the garden fountain. They knew the shape of the secret long before it ever broke into sound. And now they know something else. They know the secret is done. It is not exposed, not confessed, not punished, but it is no longer held inside, and so the walls can breathe. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to settle. The linens shift against your skin. The pillow sinks. You press one hand flat to the bed frame. It does not creak, but this time you're no longer proud of that. You no longer need it to be silent. You have learned something, that in ancient Rome, amid marble, echo and expectation, the most powerful kind of privacy was never about noise. It was about permission. To be known, to be heard, to let the house witness without fear. This house has heard joy. It has heard grief. It has heard your worst pauses and your softest calls, and it has not broken. It has simply kept. That is what Roman homes do. Not erase, not judge, not correct. They keep. And as you drift towards sleep, you no longer ask the walls to protect you. You ask only that they remember you well,